For this video, I have gone around my gym and collected all of the little handy gadgets and tools that I use with my clients when I am preparing them for kettlebell training, building up their strength, doing some maybe assessments and that type of thing. And also as we progress into kettlebell training, some of the handy gadgets that I utilize. Most of these things share something in common, which is they are not expensive. Nothing I'm about to show you guys is expensive, and it's all very high bang for the buck kind of equipment. Okay, so I'm just going to show you. I ended up with 6 things. I wasn't trying to get 6 things. These are just the things that I found in a total number of 6. Okay, so the first thing that I want to introduce you guys to is a Swiss ball. The point of the Swiss ball, and the reason that I recommend it so much to people who want to really get in shape, they want to build a lot of strength, and especially maybe have an understanding that the kettlebell is the direction that they want to go because they've heard so many wonderful things about it. So rightfully so, good on you. The kettlebell is phenomenal for so many reasons. But let's get you there one step at a time. And especially at this point, a lot of people probably feel a little bit overwhelmed with where do I start? So this is going to solve all of these questions for you. That's what I'm here to do, is help answer that question, where do you start? The Swiss ball is one of the best places to start. The reason being, a lot of the exercises that you're going to learn, even the more simple exercises, the ones that we all know about, like the kettlebell swing or clean, or maybe Turkish get up, which of course when you think about it, it's not really simple. But these exercises are highly integrated, right? It's every muscle from your toes all the way to your fingertips, everything in between. We've got a stabilization sequence happening with every move. We have a force generation sequence happening with every move. These are very, very technical and complex exercises. And to make it even more challenging, we're doing them at a high rate of speed. Swings, cleans, snatches, all of these things are happening with a very high tempo. So your nervous system is having to come to terms with or organize and perform a lot of different actions simultaneously, also very, very quickly. So how do we get to that point where we're able to do that safely, efficiently? We're not bruising our wrists or any other part of our body. We're not risking a more serious injury from lifting a weight in a way that we weren't prepared for, and also in a way that we can make sure we're enjoying the experience. Okay, so the Swiss ball, what we do is we learn in isolation what we are eventually going to practice in integration, and then we're going to introduce the kettlebell into those integrated movements, and then from there we start to speed up the tempo of those integrated kettlebell movements. Does that make sense? That there's an order in which we're going to build competence before we just start doing some of the highly technical, high-speed exercises. Got it? So the Swiss ball is a phenomenal way. It's super versatile. It's a phenomenal way of building in isolation the exercises that we are then, and the movements that we're then going to learn with integration. Okay, so back extension comes to mind. Hip flexion while keeping your back in alignment comes to mind. So there's all different kinds of things we can use the Swiss ball for. I just want to make a mention of a couple of things when purchasing a Swiss ball. First thing is medium size seems to fit most people. If you're very, very short or very, very tall, you may want to size down or up accordingly. I'm 6'4". I like the medium size. 55 centimeter is also the medium size, 45 centimeter is the small, 65 centimeter is the large. When you are purchasing a Swiss ball, make sure to get an anti-burst Swiss ball. It's the kind of Swiss ball that when it does, if you do accidentally roll over something sharp on the floor, when it gets a hole in it, the anti-burst Swiss ball will slowly leak out, whereas the cheaper Swiss balls will get a blowout. In 1 minute you're laying or sitting on your Swiss ball, the next minute you are on the ground and it's not enjoyable. So make sure you get an anti-burst Swiss ball. I recommend medium size for most people, size up or down if accordingly if you think you need to, okay? So one of the best, also just like a kettlebell, very, very versatile. They last a very, very long time. They're not super expensive, and it's just one of those pieces of equipment that you're going to have with you for a long time. All right? This is supposed to be about equipment, and I'm talking a lot about movement, so I'm going to move on. The next thing, we're going to go through these more quickly. The next thing is sweatbands that you put on your wrist. Okay? So these are, yeah, if you sweat a lot and you're running down the sweat, they can be for that purpose too, but that's not why I keep them on stock in ad, and that's not why I recommend them. I recommend these because when you are learning clean and snatch movements, which are a little bit more advanced, right? That's after we've progressed off the Swiss ball, we're doing some more advanced things. When you're learning those exercises, a lot of times the kettlebell can come around and hit the back of your wrist because your technique hasn't had the chance to develop yet. That takes time. Be patient, okay? It does take time. It's gonna bang a little bit. That's just the nature of learning and progressing. During that time, which may only be one workout, maybe 1 to 2 workouts, you can use these sweatbands and they will help. I also find that some people find that the way the kettlebell sits on the back of the wrist for Turkish get-ups can be really uncomfortable, and it takes a little bit of time to sort of develop the toughness on the back of the wrist. It almost feels like it's hitting a nerve, and then you kind of, it's strange, but your wrist kind of adapts to it. So if you're doing a lot of Turkish get-ups and it's kind of uncomfortable, especially early on in your training, these can be handy, helpful. You don't need to get, you know, the big armor plating, but of course, if you really have problems, they do have kettlebell armor protectors for your wrist if you need to take it to the next level. By the way, these are all in no particular order because I just jumped way ahead in order of how I might use these chronologically speaking, from a Swiss ball to those wrist straps. And now I'm going to go, you know, pretty far ahead too with my liquid chalk. I use a lot of chalk in my training. I use it for 2 reasons, and those 2 reasons come up very frequently. The first reason is if I'm lifting very, very heavy, I don't want a slippery handle to be the limiting factor to what I'm doing. I also will use chalk when I am doing high volume with sort of a medium to medium heavy weight. And a part of the reason for that is because, of course, I'm going to get very sweaty, and that sweat will come down my arms and maybe onto the handle, and I want to have as good of a grip as I possibly can for the volume that I'm trying to accomplish. I do also notice sometimes if I go to the gym, those kettlebells maybe are used by other people and they get a little greasy, so I might actually spray them with cleaner, wipe them down, and put a very thin layer of chalk on there. I will say that when I use this liquid chalk, I use a pea size and I spread it as much on the handle as I can. I get it evenly on my hands. Depending upon the grip that I plan on using, I'm actually going to use chalk in different spots on my hands, and only then do I reapply or put more on if I really didn't get good coverage. So I just use a very, very little pea-sized amount, and then I'm very, very careful with how much I put on. I certainly don't want to over chalk, and that's not something that I recommend. All right, in no particular order, here we go. Let's continue. We have this dowel. This is I don't know what, about 5 feet. I think they're about $1 a foot at Home Depot. And the reason for the dowel is because as you're learning bend pattern exercises, squat pattern exercises, lunge, one of the most common mistakes that people are trying to make, or correct, I should say, is that they're rounding their back when they hip hinge, so deadlift, or swing or clean, but hopefully we're not still making that mistake when we've started to do those exercises. Squat. And also lunge pattern. You want to learn how to keep your back flat throughout these movements. And also a lot of other exercises on the Swiss ball that you're going to learn where you want to keep your spine neutral. So this handy little dowel, I should have 3 points of contact. It would be the sacrum, it would be the upper thoracic, and also right back here on the back of the head, 3 points of contact. And if I squat, or let's say I hip hinge, and as I'm moving back into my hips, my my tight hamstrings cause my pelvis to tuck under and round. As soon as my back starts to round, now I've lost contact with that stick and I can feel it come off. And if I don't have the proprioceptive connection yet, if I haven't developed the body awareness to know when that rounding has happened, and I'm still in that stage of developing that awareness, then this can be a handy tool to let me know that I have in fact breached that threshold. That threshold meaning the threshold that you have range of motion before a deviation starts to occur. Does that make sense? So that's just an assessment tool that you can use. You can use it, like I said, on the Swiss ball. There's plenty of exercise. Anytime where you want to have a neutral spine for an exercise, put that dowel on the back. And of course, in one way you can hold it. If you're supine, then in parallel to the ground, then you may be able to just rest it there or have somebody spot you with it. But that's a wonderful tool because it's such a common mistake that people are making, and also that they're not aware of the moment where their back it goes into flexion as they move through certain patterns. Let's move on. All right, next up we have 12-inch party balloons. This is 100 pack, and these I use for clients when I am assessing their breath, especially the strength of their breath and the capacity of their breath, as well as also the pattern. I use that for assessing the breath, but I also use it for strengthening the breathing pattern, especially the transverse abdominis, that primary muscle of exhalation, which is also a deep core stabilizer, one of the most important deep core stabilizers of the body. So before I have people even pick up a kettlebell, I'm going to have them do some balloon breathing at the very least, so that I can assess them and make sure that yes, they do have a good breathing pattern, they do have a strong breathing pattern, and we're ready to progress. If I don't see that, then of course we're going to turn this into a daily practice where we're blowing up balloons as an integrated part of a bigger breathing practice that we'll be doing. Okay, so balloons, wonderful thing. You think of that as kind of like, if you think about a resistance band, a balloon is like a resistance band. It's even made out of the same thing. It's a resistance band for your transverse abdominis, right? It's for the primary muscle of exhalation. It puts resistance into that and allows you to really engage that muscle. And I have actually doubled up balloons and made it much harder. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to use. So moving on. Oh, you know what, before I get to that one, so I guess I am doing these in some order because I am, of course, saving the final thing until last. Of course, it's the final thing, so it would be last. This is number 5, if I counted correctly. This is my shoe. So this is really more what you don't want than what you necessarily do want in your gym, okay? What you don't want is, you don't want to be weightlifting, especially not high tempo kettlebell training, or long time under tension, or highly dynamic footwork like Turkish get-ups. You don't want to be doing those exercises in your typical athletic shoe. In any type of shoe that has a lot of cushioning, a lot of arch support, a raked heel, so the heel is higher than the toe. You don't want that. You want either a shoe like I just showed you, where it's just a minimal, the least amount of shoe that you can possibly get away with. I wear those Vibram toe shoes, which I do not think are the most attractive shoes in my personal opinion. I don't wear them to look good. I wear them because they're extremely good for your feet and for your gait, and also they're fantastic for in the gym and weightlifting. So my advice to you is this, is either go barefoot in the gym, which is preferable. If you cannot go barefoot and you're training in a place where they enforce a shoe policy, which most gyms do, then find the least amount of shoe that you can get away with. You want virtually no cushioning. You want virtually no rake. And you also want to have, if you can, a wide toe box in your shoe. Okay, so those are the characteristics you're looking for. As you can see, I kind of go like all in on the shoe with the most kind of like the toe shoe, which, like I said, I don't think that they're the most attractive, but they are definitely the most comfortable. They're the healthiest for your feet, and I don't have to swap them out when I come in and start weightlifting. I just wear these pretty much all day unless I'm going on a date. All right, here we go. Moving into the final piece of equipment on this list, which is the kettlebell. Okay, so this is a cast iron powder coated kettlebell. That's what this type of kettlebell is. Now, there's to some degree, there's a matter of a question of preference, like what kind of kettlebell do you prefer? If you see on the ground behind me, the colorful kettlebells, those are called competition style kettlebells. Some people really do prefer those, even though they may not be training as competitive kettlebell athletes. Some people just prefer competition kettlebells, and generally speaking, competition kettlebells are very high quality, and I certainly say, hey, if that's what you prefer, go for it. It's personal preference. And I do use competition kettlebells myself. However, I do personally prefer and tend to use far more cast iron kettlebells like the one that I just showed you. Okay, so what I prefer to use is the cast iron powder coated kettlebell. So let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of this kettlebell, and then we'll also refer back to the competition kettlebell so you guys have a comparison. So let's talk about the characteristics of the cast iron powder coated kettlebell. First of all, you notice it does have a color coding, so you know what weight it is by looking at it, as long as you know what the coding all means. You'll notice that, first of all, the handle, the shape of the handle that you're seeing here is very consistent with most hardstyle kettlebells. However, a lot of times the manufacturer will have a slightly different shape to the handle. I've seen kettlebells with huge handles and others with much smaller ones. I don't really love the oversized handles, but I would say that a bigger concern would be the one that's too small, because I definitely want one that allows me to get my hand deeply inserted through what we call the window of that kettlebell. I want to get my insertion deep through the window with the kettlebell sitting low on my wrist, so that the kettlebell does not sit high in my hand and pull my wrist into extension like that. So I want a big enough window to allow the handle to sit low, close to my wrist, underneath the pinky finger. This does not sit very low, to be honest with you, but this is an 18-pound kettlebell, so I won't be using this very much, and I don't really have a problem with that. With this particular style kettlebell, the handle gets bigger as the weight gets higher, so the diameter of the handle gets bigger, so your grip has to adjust, but also the window will get larger as the weight gets bigger, allowing for a bigger hand to get through that window. It's going to sit down a little bit lower on the wrist. I'm just using this, of course, for demonstration purposes. It's a lot easier to hold here and talk with you guys about this. Okay, so the handle gets bigger with the cast iron kettlebell as the bell gets bigger, and of course, so does the mass, the ball of the bell also gets bigger and grows in size. Now you might be like, well, of course it does. Well, with a competition bell, they don't. With competition bells, all of those dimensions remain the same. The diameter of the handle and the size of the actual bell, those dimensions remain the same, regardless of whether you're getting a 4 kilo or a 48 kilo competition kettlebell. They're all going to be the same. Now, there is some variance between manufacturers between a 33 and a 35 millimeter handle, but otherwise, if you get the same exact set with the same intended handle, then there's no deviation in any of those dimensions. Okay, so that's one of the things that really differentiates the competition bells from the hardstyle bells, is of course that the hardstyle bells get bigger as they get heavier. These ones, as I mentioned, are powder coated. I would avoid with kettlebells, in purchasing kettlebells, I would avoid the vinyl wrapped ones. I would avoid the ones that have really shiny chrome handles. And I would just avoid any kettlebell that when you look at the outside of it, one thing that is kind of common with some really cheap ones, if you see a lot of pitting in the metal, and also generally if you see a lot of pitting, you also see kind of a lot of like raised areas where the metal kind of bumps out of the handle and the rest of the bell. If the texture of the handle especially, but the bell in general, is really coarse, you may want to steer away from that one too. Of course, you can sand them down a little bit, so that kind of depends upon what you prefer. Powder coated are generally really good as far as the finish is concerned. They last a long time. However, if you want to get your own that you've kind of sanded down and you want to just spray paint it black or whatever color you want to paint it, and just know that you might have to repaint it every once in a while, that's no problem. I've had a lot of kettlebells that started off powder coated. They got so dinged up that then I went back over and spray painted them to clean them up. It's just the nature of it, and that's, to me, a part of the beauty of the kettlebell. I actually love looking as a piece of art at kettlebells that have been used and used and used and broken in. And to me, it's just like there's this energy within this kettlebell that has been put inside of it by every single practitioner that ever picked it up and poured their energy into it. So I don't know, that's just me, and that's completely irrelevant to the topic at hand. So I'll stop the video here. These are the things that I keep in my gym that I use specifically to get people into kettlebell training. Okay, so this is the before stuff, and then also once you get into kettlebell training, obviously you're going to need a kettlebell. Those wristbands are going to be super helpful, and you're going to need a little bit of chalk eventually too. Just be careful when you apply the chalk, and of course the liquid chalk, in my opinion, as somebody who has to clean up after myself and my clients, it's very superior to the powder that gets everywhere. Thank you guys so much for watching.